friends. I welcome you to a new episode of my art podcast. How does the art scene tick? My guest today is the artist Manuela Karin Knaut. And because our conversation was so wonderfully long, we decided to make 2 parts out of it. So today you will get part 1 of our episode. And here in this part 1, we explore the artist's career together. We hear her thoughts on the country, life, and people, and we have the art of this well-traveled woman explained to us. Manuela brims with curiosity and a loving perspective on people. And so do her paintings. And so does this conversation. I wish you lots of enjoyment. How does the art scene tick? Everything we always wanted to know about art. A podcast by and with Petra Lawson. Hello, Manuela Karin Knaut. Hello, dear Petra Lawson. I greet you. Many thanks for being here. I'm really happy that you found the time and are now telling us who you are, what you do, and whatever else comes to my mind to ask. Thank you for the nice intro. Very nice. Yes, Manuela, you are a freelance artist and live and work in Braunschweig. But you have, and I find that definitely, let's say, something special. Because you have a Master of Arts in Fine Art from the University of, and now I hope I am saying it correctly, Witwatersrand in Johannesburg, South Africa. Did I pronounce it correctly? Almost. That's why most people abbreviate it. Most people actually say Wits University, and it is a bit complicated to pronounce. But it is the University of the Witwatersrand. Witwatersrand. It also sounds better than what I said, but that's no problem at all. Witwatersrand. Yes, that's so typical South Africa. Yes, that's true. And that's not all. You have a Bachelor of Arts in Art Education from the Justus Liebig University in Gießen. You also studied a bit at the School of Fine Art in Braunschweig. You studied a lot? Yes. Although the Braunschweig part was actually after my degrees. There are then partly collaborations and artistic cooperations, and that was no longer really my active studies. And the BA was actually divided into a traditional first and second state examination. Wow, that sounds... Yes, that is all very, very long ago. Sounds very official too. True, that didn't exist before BA Bachelor. Right. At some point it had to be somewhat adjusted for my further studies. And so it turned out that way. How does one come to study art at Witwatersrand in Johannesburg? As I said, I had already completed a first art degree beforehand. Back then, however, it had a more educational focus. I have also worked for many years at various educational institutions. As a lecturer, as an art educator, in museum education, as a department head, I was a university lecturer and so on. And was always actually at least, let's say, felt like 75% a freelance artist. This degree, which I always felt was missing for me, was precisely this degree in fine arts. And in the past it was really the case, which isn't true anymore today, that after the first friendly conversations with gallery owners or with museum people, you were directly, to put it nicely, more or less directly then, subsequently, with a friendly smile, pointed out or asked, well, at which academy did you now study? And then when you had to explain at length that you somehow took a detour to ultimately reach fine arts, the conversation was usually over at that point. And therefore, I always intended to. On the first attempt, I did not choose to. That was good too. I simply showed myself that you're never too old. A woman is never too old to eventually fulfill her real wishes and dreams. And since I'm more of an academic type, I love painting and I'm very practical and work a lot. But I also like reading, researching, and I like to know what I'm talking about also in theory. And so it came about that I really wanted to complete this master's degree and then did. And the gallerists who maybe you don't even have to answer this, rejected you. They look a bit silly now because you are quite successful. Not so many actually rejected me back then, but that was indeed the case, and probably everyone can confirm that. When it came onto the market in the early 1990s, it was just like that back then. Today, everything has become very, very different, and that's a good thing. This phrase, self-taught artist, which for many years was more of a term with a totally negative connotation, is no longer a problem today. The market has become more open. People have simply become more open, quite simply. Is that your feeling? That is my feeling, although in the end, I think quality prevails. Whether you achieve quality through your own studies, through a long university or academy education, that's ultimately irrelevant. But it's the same in music. You don't need to have graduated from a music academy to be a successful singer. Absolutely. So we're on the same page when you say that quality prevails. I can imagine that becoming a quality artist is harder without formal studies. If you consider studying as an intense form of engaging with the material, then it's probably harder without it. Yes, for me it was never a question. I always wanted to do it, and I still flirt with various university programs and university courses, and I am not completely through with it yet. I just find it such a varied, such an exciting topic, especially the shift between this very, sometimes also very withdrawn, solitary practice here in my studio, and then again the discourse, the exchange with students, with colleagues. I find that extremely important. I still haven't understood how you came to South Africa. Yes, that's true, we digressed. It was totally interesting. I wouldn't want to miss it, but I still want to ask the question. I don't want to avoid that at all. It's a very, very beautiful story. I had already spent some time abroad before my first university studies and also during university. Back then it was mainly the USA, my partner, my husband. He felt exactly the same way. He also studied in the United States back then. And we have always been very, very, how should I put it, internationally interested, open-minded, well-traveled, simply minded. And when we had children, and they reached, let's say, a travel-ready age, there was really no stopping us. We traveled a lot with our 2 daughters, and we still do today, if the opportunity arises to do this together. And it was always clear to us that we would this open-mindedness or this desire to simply show the children that the world doesn't end at the borders of Braunschweig, but actually starts there. And so we quite early looked into the possibility of relocating our professional activities abroad. And then we simply took this opportunity so that we both could work there, could live there. I was studying there and I also had a large workshop, and it fit quite well. Our children were attending the international school there, so it was a complete win-win situation for everyone involved. I bet we will find that in your art, but we will discuss that later. I would now like to quickly go back. For example, in 1990 or since 1990, you have done numerous exhibitions domestically and abroad, which is only logical after we've now heard how you traveled the globe. namely in South Africa, in Ghana, in Switzerland, in Denmark, in the UK, Austria, USA, Israel, and your works are present in public and private collections worldwide. I would now like to say your focus is on painting, photography, site-specific installations, and cultural interventions. I always find it quite exciting to hear where people have ended up. You just told us about that, but initially, what brought you to art in the first place? I haven't heard that yet. Would you like to briefly tell us about that too? Why art for you? When you listed all that, I thought, oh God, I do all that? It's completely confusing. I researched it. Yes, you researched well. It really matches the truth. And if you ask me, or I have of course often been asked, how did you actually come to art? And the classic is always, yes, ever since I was a child, I was an artist or something. But that's really how it was. I grew up in a household or in a family in which art really played no role. Even in my immediate environment, art, you simply didn't deal with it at all. It was not of interest. We grew up in a mining area, in salt mining near the former border with East Germany, back then in the border zone area. Everything was important, but not art. But there were, in our house or on our property, a large carpentry workshop. Unfortunately, it was never really was actively put into operation, but only to a limited extent, because my grandfather, for whom this carpentry workshop was originally built, remained in the war at that time. And my grandmother then tried, together with my mother and employees, to get this workshop running or to keep it running, which was not easy. So there was this huge workshop, like a kind of museum, that wasn't used. And that's where I came into play, because I found it an incredibly exciting space. More exciting than all the other toys I had, the wood, the materials, the screws. I can see that. Yes, exactly. The smell. That was the true paradise for me. And my father, who of course realized that was my true interest, supported it. So he gave me a toolbox with my own saw very, very early on. And clamps, and I don't know. So I thought it was great. That was still in elementary school days. That he took it so seriously. Conveniently, there was a large sawmill right across the street where the wood was available. And so I began to work with wood and build things very, very early on. But from the start, strangely enough, not things you really need, but things you don't need. And I found that super fascinating. What kind of things are those that one doesn't need? Can you give an example? Things that one, yes, that's exactly it. It's not that easy. What doesn't one need? I always need everything. Me too, actually. Yes, that's many years later I actually continued with that. Those are the unreasonable spaces. So I started building a hut in this carpentry workshop. I didn't build it outside where it might actually have been useful, in our big garden or something like that. I built it in this workshop. True, that is quite completely pointless. I couldn't get it out. It was basically completely useless. But for me, a sort of artistic refuge where I then spent months working on it. That was my first attempt to build rooms within rooms. I found that super exciting even back then. Later, I then, through my art teacher, that was also a very nice story in high school, he opened a sort of door for me. He had the key to the art world. And then I realized art is not something that happens elsewhere. It is happening here in my life right now, even here in the border zone area. And he was just a completely charismatic man who had already exhibited at the Documenta and simply brought the white world into this small place in Hessen for us, thereby opening doors for my later life. And do you also believe where the soul one's own soul feels at home, you can't really avoid that, right? Maybe it was the art teacher in this case, but perhaps it could have been someone else, and you just took advantage of it. Yes, I am convinced of that, because it's simply in you, because you actually have to do it, because there's no other way. Yes, that's exactly how it is. Yes, that's exactly how it is. I believe that too. It would have come out sooner or later, I'm absolutely certain of that. I always have had an artistic way of thinking in me. I actually thought differently than other kids my age, and that really never changed. I still see it that way today, somewhere. You talked about your enthusiasm for traveling in Europe with your husband. And that sounds like how you just described it. Totally fantastic and luxurious. And such traveling does something to the mind. It makes you open-minded, it opens, and I believe you learn an incredible amount. You see a lot. And when you were in Johannesburg, you don't always see just the beautiful things. I wasn't in Johannesburg last year, but I was in Africa, and some things there already made me to chew on, which you get to see. To what extent have these travels influenced you and your art? A big question, right? Yes. The travels, yes. The travels or the desire to travel, they make up a very, very, very large part of my being. But behind it, there is actually much more. Behind it lies an endless curiosity, a zest for life too. But also the critical perspective that you can start anew anywhere in the world. And just as easily, you are replaceable everywhere in the world. I have already realized all of that as well. Actually, very important things, both of them. Yes, that means when you've made yourself comfortable somewhere, and then house and garden and, I don't know, the classics, the desirable classics for many, rightly so. By then, at the latest, it's actually time to question everything and look at it from the other side. And that usually works quite well by leaving your comfort zone and look at other places, look back. How is it really in my life? Or what have I been upset about for years? Or what else does life have to offer? I find I wake up every morning with endless curiosity. And I think to myself, let's see what happens today. Just with such joy. And I carry this joy and this genuineness, this openness with me everywhere I travel. And these are not the most beautiful beaches in the world or the most beautiful hotels in the world, but I also quite like to look behind the facade and move around in part. Very adventurous, rough areas, to put it that way. For example, well, I mean, it's generally, of course, in South Africa, it's also you were there yourself. Isn't everything actually quite simple? It is also dangerous. Yes, although I am always very interested in keeping this dangerous attribute away from Johannesburg. Because that is too simple. That's the classic. We also often heard that back then before we went there. Isn't it too dangerous? Yes, of course. All of life is dangerous. I just want to be in the middle of it. My life is not a cushioned program. I know how I can behave. I am a very, very... How should I say, what do you call it in German? When you are humble, you know what I mean? That you simply feel a certain humility and say, I am a guest here now. Show me how it works here in your country. And with that, I've always done very, very well. I also tried to learn one of the 11 national languages, which opened many doors for me, sometimes caused smiles or disbelief. But I thought, if I'm already living in this country, in this city, And I work there. I really had my studio, my atelier right in the middle of downtown Johannesburg. And I thought to myself, then then you must at least know a little of the language Zulu. And that was the key to so much. How do you learn that? There is no app for it. Are there books? Yes, you can't do much with the books. I am generally someone who learns a lot through simply learns languages by listening. I had a co-worker who spoke Zulu quite well. And of course, friends and colleagues I met at university. And then I also had the opportunity to take an intensive course with a few female colleagues and friends. And that was actually the most valuable time. But not much of it is left now. But it was at least enough to make daily life a bit smoother. Has anything ever happened to you? I mean, if you now say yes, it's too simple with the dangerous. Well, our house was broken into a few years ago. Really, the door was broken open and valuable things stolen. Both of material and sentimental value. That's actually much worse. And that has really shaken us. And now there's an alarm system. Has nothing ever happened to you that you haven't lost your faith and trust? Yes, exactly. You could say it like that. Fortunately, of course, we have, of course, heard other stories, but we really are... Yes, we had it very, very good, and fortunately nothing happened to us. And we are there. We left this country with a very, very big love and with a great yes, with a feeling that we also left a piece of our heart here. And so also just as a family, that's a story or a time in our lives that is irretrievable, and you can still feel it even now. I still have very, very close connections. I then passed my studio on to a close friend of mine, and there is still a print workshop there where I could work again at any time. There are also still a few materials of mine on site. It just hasn't happened in the last few years, of course, due to Corona, to work there for a longer period of time again. But I am really looking forward to doing that again sometime. Just the other day, I wrote to a professor from the university again, who said, when are you coming back? And you should do an exhibition here again. And of course, I would really, really like to do that. Can you put that into words? Let's stick with South Africa or even the city. How does that reflect in your works? Interestingly, I was always asked this in South Africa as well. And it was a bit like everyone wanted to hear that, of course. Like, since you've been here, you've surely used different colors because of the light and circumstances, or you're surely inspired to use brighter colors. Funnily enough, no. Even before, if you look at the pictures I painted just shortly before, not much has changed. I would rather say that I was just in the right place there. I just fit in there. Maybe it was the logical result of what I had already done before, that I simply there artistically continued. For example, shortly before I went to South Africa, I did my first screen printing works. And then I intensified it greatly there, also in the screen printing workshop, but that it color-wise or so, how should I say?
Somehow totally changed. I can't say that. It doesn't have to be totally changed, but maybe somehow an influence. So when I look at your pictures, I have the feeling of to see a very friendly, positive person who thinks out of the box. No conventions. I see no rules. I see freedom or feel that way. And I would also like to discuss a picture later, which I have selected.
I am curious.
We'll get to that later. You just mentioned how this traveling and living in other places on this globe have opened up. Maybe that's exactly it. That you can't really specify it like you see in your works. If I throw the term chaos into the discussion, does that have anything to do with
You're
you
exactly
or not?
right here. It's a shame that you can't see the studio in this podcast, because I have actually retreated to my studio, my workspace for this podcast recording today, thinking, yes, this is where I belong. I work here every day. This is the place where everything happens. And chaos, yes, chaos always has this negative touch, like in the sense of does not have it under control. It can be negative, but it doesn't have to be.
Thank you.
For me, it is actually something very positive, and I separate it very strictly. That means here in my studio, everything is really topsy-turvy, paint tubes everywhere and the floor, and I very, very often paint 5 pieces simultaneously. Things are glued, things are stapled. In the corner are materials from my last installation, which I just finished building last week. At the front, there is currently a ceramic sculpture in the making in my space, which I have exclusively for ceramic work. Yes, that's probably what most people would commonly call chaos. When I leave here after a work day, and I usually spend around 6 to 8 hours here on site, then I completely change, then I wash and moisturize my hands, then the trash is taken out, and suddenly I am a very tidy, you can hardly believe it, person who emerges from her chaos. And when I am home, then it is the chaos is actually cleared away or behind me. So I separate that very distinctly.
So your studio is not at home, you have it in another place?
No, exactly. That is very, very important to me.
Yes, sounds like it.
For a while, I had the studio in our house upstairs. Of course, it very quickly became much too small, but for me, it's important because I want to go to work. So I'm also like that, yes. When you say it like that, or sometimes I explain it as well, because many imagine that artists have such an easygoing trajectory in life or daily routine. Sometimes they go to the studio at 10, sometimes at 11, or they sleep in, forget it, I am such a work bee. Yeah? My alarm rings at 6 in the morning. Then, of course, there is a bit of a family routine. But then, yes, with packed sandwiches, it's off to work.
Okay.
And when I get here, I change completely. Like I would be working somewhere underground or something like that, and then it starts, then the work begins.
Is it my impression that you like to do large works? Let's talk about the pictures.
Yes, I really, really enjoy working on large formats, although I still feel restricted, and that's actually crazy. I truly have endless space here. And now at a picture length, let's say, of 4 meters, that's the limit here in my studio, in the main painting room where I am right now. I would just like to paint in a really large factory hall and work there on, I don't know, a 5 by 6 meter painting or something.
But it doesn't scare you either? Not at all? You have to work for that too, right?
Yes, I agree with you. When I look at how I started earlier, what my biggest formats were, those count today among my rather smaller or smallest. Of course, sketches are constantly created on the side, even small canvases, which I also treat like sketches, like preliminary work. But with the big works, that's where I feel myself, so to speak. I need that.
You say sketches. I'll just grab some then. Do you need sketches for abstract painting?
These are not the sketches in the sense one might imagine now. I have 6 recent sketches lying behind me, which I made yesterday. These are also partly warm-up exercises. With closed eyes, I try out different graphite pencils, graphite and charcoal in combination with spray paint. That is then also a kind of art to get into such a color mode. So if I look behind me, I have a very light lime green mixed with graphite. That doesn't mean that I will go tomorrow, prime a canvas and say, well, now you transfer this sketch onto a work of 2 by 1.50 meters. I usually don't do that. Sometimes sketches do actually arise for commissioned work, for example, which I then create on my iPad. That can happen, but my sketches happen all the time on the side, in notebooks, in my calendar, and on piles of paper that are lying around everywhere here.
You don't just have to make sketches to properly depict the dog now.
So exactly, at least in my way of working, you don't have to, or I don't have to, but there are certainly colleagues who do that as a preliminary step for what they later transfer onto a larger canvas.
Where I come from, near Cologne, they say nothing works because it doesn't work.
That's right, I agree.
I quote, and unfortunately, I didn't write down the name of who said it. I ask for your forgiveness, or correct me if I'm wrong. I'd like to add who said it in case I get into trouble here. Her pictures are balancing acts of color, form and line, surface and space, abstraction and realism, image and text. Do you know the phrase?
Yes, but you who said that, I couldn't tell you off the top of my head right now either.
Doesn't matter. Maybe we can get it from someone.
Can you agree with that? Do you see yourself in this statement? Should I read it aloud here? No. I already know it. The sentence. That's true. That's kind of what characterizes my images. Yes, this layering. Most of my works consist of many layers. There are also paintings that look like they are painted very loosely. This leaves the negative space open. So, for example, when I work with unprimed coarse canvas, with natural canvas, then this layering does not partially apply. But in most of my large works, in larger canvas works, you see many, many layers. Whether you can really capture that in the quality of the photos is the question. I know. I also love reworking paintings that are a few years old and adding another layer. And this layering, this interweaving of fabric, of color, of form, then adding charcoal or another silk screen on top, integrating a piece of fabric again. I just did that recently with fabrics I bought in Tokyo. I think that's fantastic. It's a bit like cooking in a giant pot and constantly adding new ingredients.
This is such a great sauce, right?
Yes, exactly. But it's more like in a pot, I would say.
Also, yeah.
Or like a stew or a curry, because you might also puree sauce, right? And my paintings are not pureed. They are still the individual parts. So this mix of many individual elements that then create a harmonious whole. Yes, it is like that. I can still live with that quite well, with this description.
Okay, nice. Berries and cherries. I love this picture of you. Pink. I see pink. Anyway, this summer, it's my absolute super favorite color. I think you could really see that well in my clothing. I think that's also big. 1.80 meters by 1.20 meters, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that's relatively big. It's not huge, but it's relatively big. How did this come about? Was it a longer project or did it come together quickly?
Yes. So this berries and cherries, if you say that pink is your favorite color, and I see that, yes, that many, especially in the last 2 or 3 years, pink is becoming more and more popular. I was painting with pink already 25 years ago, and quite excessively. So I have been loyal to my color choice 25 years ago, just as much as today. Not much has really changed. I find it sometimes quite exciting myself when I'm with collectors and say to myself, wow, how old is this painting? When did they buy it? Unbelievable. And then I think to myself, this could really somehow be from this year. I find that quite interesting. But with this work that you're specifically referring to, it is a painting. I spoke about it just now. I left this negative space open. That was still inspired by these pictures from Japan. The year before, I had an intense time in Japan and also an exhibition in Kyoto. I also collaborated with colleagues there in Japan and later did a large project for a temple in Kyoto. And this theme of negative space was super important for me, that you don't have to, in quotes, paint over every picture from top to bottom. Sometimes less is indeed more in my art, often not. Often it is really chaotic and masses of material overlap.
With your pictures, I wouldn't do that now.
But sometimes it's just a series that is exactly like that. And that was all still this Japanese-inspired, rather restrained, not so much lushly materialized series of works. And there were also a few more in various shades of red and also in black and white tones, all painted on this open, coarse, unprimed canvas.
I see Japan in there. I couldn't tell you why, but now that you mention it's from Japan, or at least inspired by Japan, I totally see it, and I think it's brilliant.
Yes, and that was this series. And I actually always like to switch back and forth between these very, very rich, labor-intensive, powerful works, where you can see the many hours, and then again, these really light ones. Also sketched works where lines were created with just one color. So this mix is what makes it for me.
Yes, how do you start a pictures?
In a room, in my farthest room here on the upper floor, here in a 2-story studio, there are always many beautiful, newly stretched canvases.
Do you make them yourself?
No, I have an assistant, or I always work with 1 or 2 assistants, and they always stand in the back in stacks. So there's the natural canvas and then the white canvases. And then, yes, I can't even say what it depends on. I just take one of these 2 canvases. Sometimes I also start directly with a series and place 3 or 4 works side by side. And then I actually start with one color.
And then you see the size on its own. You do it instinctively. This size appeals to me now. I'll take it, place it there.
Yes,
1 or more.
And then it starts. And when I work with a more fluid color and want to create a work in which, for example, pores play a role, like in these berries and cherries, that's an artwork where pores played a role. I have various inks prepared in advance, drawing inks mixed with water and with various other materials, or sometimes mixed with an acrylic adhesive. And that was initially tried out, also on a smaller format or on paper. And when I work with such things, I lay the canvases down.
So it doesn't run down
exactly.
right away.
And that is always the problem that makes me very quickly very nervous. I can only do it at the end of a work day. When I have done such pourings, there is a huge flood on the floor. And actually, you can't really do anything more because then everything is covered with large canvases. I then maneuver around somehow, trying not to bump into anything so that the colors don't shift anymore, and that's it. And if you are not finished internally, then you are just...
It's
yes,
shooting.
Exactly. But finding the right moment for starting such a new series, for example, even before a weekend or before I travel, so that things can dry in peace. That simply comes with experience, knowing that you shouldn't start at 12 noon if you want to work until 6 in the evening. Instead, I would start at 5 and beforehand secure everything in the adjacent room, so I can leave immediately afterward to check the drying process 1 or 2 days later.
I could with every case.
Yes, if you manage it.
It's just easy when you have an idea. And this inner compulsion, wow, this is now.
That's it for now.
It's only 11 o'clock.
And then until tomorrow, yes, that can definitely become a problem. But as I said, with increasing experience in how things flow, it's no longer a problem. It's really the years of experience, the hours and weeks I've spent here with my paint buckets. There aren't so many surprises halfway through anymore.
Yes, I understand that.
When do you know that a painting is finished, that is a question I don't even ask myself, about which, strangely enough, I am completely sure. I am very confident, at least in my feelings. Whether that is perceived the same way from outside, I naturally cannot say. But this doubt, whether a picture is finished or not, I only know that in very rare cases. In very, very rare cases, sometimes when I then ask someone for advice, say, take a look, what do you think? And then if some hint comes, I actually already know that the painting isn't finished. Otherwise, I wouldn't have to ask the question.
Yes, exactly. I can understand that.
I find it such a freedom for me to decide like a little child. I am the decider in my studio, and I decide when a painting is finished, and whether the painting is also finished in the eyes of my viewers, clients, buyers, collectors. I can hope that I am understood that way, but I am always relatively sure about that, and I rarely hesitate. Honestly, I'm always relatively sure about that.
It's just a great feeling, right? Yes.
But also a feeling which is naturally a part of the daily work, because I don't perceive my work as a painter or as an artist, as a spasm or struggle, or how should I say it? Rather, it's something totally fulfilling. I do it with great enthusiasm, with great love and dedication. And when I feel, okay, it's finished, it has such a nice conclusion, then I set it aside very satisfied, or put the stamp on the back or something. Yes, that's a nice conclusion, actually. Yes, these cramped images do exist too, I also have to say honestly, but fortunately it's rare that you keep pulling them out.
It does not want to succeed.
I then also put pictures away, but I also deliberately turn them around and cover them with a white bed sheet, so that they do not disturb me for a long time. 1 year, 2 years, and then I take them out again. And then things often look quite different.
I find that quite exciting now. Why is that? Can you analyze that for yourself? What's going on with this picture? Why is it disturbing?
Yes, I can. Or I don't know now if I can. I'll try. These are partly images. I know they're good. Oh, I know they have something exciting, something relevant, but I cannot yet fathom or oversee what relevance they have or take in my current work, what importance. These could then be images that do not match this cycle at all, for example, that I'm currently working on, either in terms of color or theme, but somehow they came about. And if I then set them aside, cover them, put them away, then I take them out again half a year or a year later, 2 years later, and suddenly everything becomes clear to me. And I say to myself, yes, wonderful. It just didn't fit at that moment, or it was already thought ahead to be right.
You would have to sell them super expensively because they took so long.
And
yes,
I don't think that's an
simple.
argument either.
No?
But I always find it exciting to dig out such old things where you've really worked hard, and then suddenly they only need 3 strokes
Yes.
and are complete. Then it all makes sense, and I'm happy. Also, rolled up large works. I always unroll them again, my works. Otherwise, my storage downstairs, well, I have 2 storage rooms. It just wouldn't work at all. Really, the very large format pieces, they are all rolled up. And after some time, I like to look at the pictures again in their original form, and then they are unrolled again. We just did that often in the last 2 weeks in the next room. That's why I have 20 rolled up large format works that I keep questioning. Is that what I still want to say today in the year 2024? Or do I want to revise it? Let that stand as a statement of perhaps you were ahead of your time with these images and realized you still needed
Something, a life experience that you are still missing to complete it. And that's the
that
line?
can be anything. Yes, that can be.
Could be, yes.
Or sometimes the choice of materials, the choice of colors changes simply in the studio. And that gives you new possibilities, or suddenly you're working with completely different brushes than in previous years. It's fascinating how that
Dear
changes.
Manuela, thank you very, very, very much. Now we have thoroughly covered your painting here, but that's not all you do. In part 2 of our podcast, we will discuss your installations. I am really looking forward to that. Thank you very much and see you next time.
I thank you.
How does the art scene tick? Everything we've always wanted to know about art. A podcast by and with Petra Lossen,